Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to Colorism Conversations. I'm Dr. Karen Moore, the founder of I Am the Color of Beautiful global spoken word initiative and movement where we are redefining the standard of beauty for women of color. And our focus is on eradicating colorism in communities of color across the globe. We're so glad to be here tonight for this rebroadcast of this really amazing show that we had with Adriana Waterston, who is the Senior Vice President of Insights and Strategy at Horowitz Research. And it was quite an amazing, amazing show that we had with her talking about colorism in the advertising room. And joining me today, my co-host, is my sister, Renee Moore, who is also the public health advisor for The Color of Beautiful. So we're going to welcome her on to the show tonight. Welcome, sis.
Hey, thank you.
So glad to have you here. So I'm so excited for this conversation about colorism in the advertising room. And, you know, you've told us on many occasions about colorism being also a public health issue, just like racism is. And to really explore it in advertising is quite a unique thing.
Yes, it is. And, you know, people don't realize how the things that we see and hear every day, even starting at a young age, continue to impact us as we grow up and how we carry those and how that affects how we interact with others.
Yeah.
And then that can begin to affect your health. It begins to affect your opportunities. So it really is a global health issue.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So we're going to get started with this show because this show did go about 55 minutes. So we're going to dive right in, and then we're going to come back and have a short conversation afterwards about the things that Adriana mentioned in this show. So we'll be back with you, sis.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to get started with this broadcast with Adriana Waterston. Her name is Adriana Waterston. She is Senior Vice President of Insights and Strategy at Horowitz Research. Adriana is a research junkie with the flair for finding the story behind the statistics, teasing the meaning out of the measurement, and revealing the faces behind the facts. A seasoned quantitative and qualitative market researcher with expertise on consumers and their attitudes towards their media tools, Adriana has moderated hundreds of groups and conducted in-home ethnographic research on a bevy of topics ranging from advertising and marketing effectiveness, media and entertainment consumption, unmet needs in technology and media, pricing and packaging, travel, customer service satisfaction, lifestyles and family dynamics, and brand corporate image. Adriana is a thought leader in the media industry, frequently quoted in the trade press and presenting at industry events including the Streaming TV Summit, the Hispanic TV Summit, the NAB, the cable show INTX, the Media Insights and Engagement Conference, ARF, Advertising Research Foundation events, and others. A Puerto Rico native, Adriana has been named one of the media industry's most influential minorities in cable by Cable Facts magazine, has received a TAMI award for her work in multicultural marketing and received the Agency Executive Award for Research and Measurement at the Diversity Leadership Awards. She co-authored The Practical Guide to Multicultural Marketing, which won the Bronze Global eBook Awards in the multicultural nonfiction category in 2013. She is also the lead organizer and co-host of the annual Cultural Insights Forum, a New York City event that draws a crowd of over 350 media and advertising executives. Adriana oversees all of Horowitz's millennial, multicultural, and Latinx research endeavors. Please welcome Adriana Waterston.
I feel a little embarrassed at that description, but I'm so grateful to be invited here and happy to be spending Sunday afternoon with you.
Thank you so much for having us. Being here. We are so looking forward to getting this amazing information that you have. It is so important that we begin to understand how colorism is also affected with advertising and marketing. So the first thing I want to ask you about is what made you aware of colorism in marketing?
Right. Well, first of all, the issue of colorism for me is an interesting conversation just from a personal perspective, because obviously I'm a white Latina, and I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, and I grew up in Puerto Rico, and I lived there until I was 18, until I came to the States to go to college, and then I went back and forth and whatever. My whole life history is not important, but the point of the matter is that as a white Latina, I never really thought about color and race as impacting me in any particular way, positively or negatively. In Puerto Rico, yes, obviously there are racialized issues, and we're not exempt from that in Latin America and in the Caribbean, of course.
Right.
But I never really experienced it until I came here, and started becoming much more aware of issues of race here in this country and how they play out, and also of my own privilege, being a white Latina, that I could be Latina in those circumstances where being Latina was relevant, and I could speak my language, and I could connect with my folks, and I could all of that, and then I could also kind of quote unquote pass as a white non-Hispanic in any context that I ever needed to be in. And so, that was when I started realizing how much privilege was wrapped around color. And of course, that's also informed a lot of the way that we think at Horowitz about, the work that we do and the consultations that we do for our clients. But to answer your direct question about how we got involved with it, I will actually take us back to the early days of the cable industry. Horowitz Research started off as a consulting company, and this was before I even joined the company, that worked with cable when cable was new. When in the 1980s, when before the 1980s, there were not very many cable networks. It was really all about just trying to get signals into rural neighborhoods that weren't reached by broadcast signals. That's what cable was from the beginning of time. In the early 1980s, people started realizing that they were making investments in laying cable into these different neighborhoods. They were actually starting to go into urban areas and suburban areas. And that's when they said, well, if we have all this technology to deliver signals into homes, then maybe there's an opportunity for more content. Maybe it's more than just five networks. Maybe there's a market for a 24-hour sports network. Maybe there's a market for a network of history and nature documentaries, music videos. And this is why we started seeing MTV and all this other kind of stuff. So my boss founded the company back then and did a lot of consulting. Well, how is this related to issues of diversity? Because at the time, when companies were making decisions about where to lay cable lines, they were looking at different communities and audience and potential audiences, and making assumptions about those audiences based on stereotypes about race, right? And so they were choosing to not lay cable in. They were literally redlining neighborhoods where there were a lot of Black and Hispanic populations, because they believed that our communities weren't interested. They didn't have the money. They weren't going to be good customers. They wanted to go after sort of the quote unquote what they perceived to be as the more desirable consumers who were unspokenly white suburbia, right?
Right.
And so when I joined the company in around 2000, and even before I joined, though, what our data was showing was a very different story. Was that even though these neighborhoods and communities were being redlined, and still are, by the way, as we talked about before we got onto the live version of the show, the digital divide, all of a sudden with COVID, we realized, oh, not all communities have broadband. And what are the communities that are under indexing for having access to broadband? They still are, Black and Hispanic communities, lower income Black and Hispanic communities, still very problematic today. But our data showed a very different story. Showed that our communities, the Black community, the Hispanic community, other diverse communities, were actually some of the most interested in entertainment content, the most willing to pay, the most hungry for a broad array of content, and weren't being satisfied. And so we really made it our objective as a company to help educate the media industry, and by extension all of the industries that touch the media industry, which is advertising and technology and all of that, about how valuable and important our communities are and how much we deserve to be served. So that is where it all started. So long-winded answer. But then, so we did a pretty good job, I think, of really advocating and educating. And we sort of took a lot of companies and clients of ours, to the water and got them to drink, But as things have evolved, what we have started seeing is that, more and more advertising agencies, more and more brands, more and more media companies are sort of embracing the fact that, multicultural America is America, that that Black and Hispanic consumers are a very, very big, important, and valuable part of the quote unquote general market for content and advertising in the U.S. And so there's been sort of an increasing awareness that that the media industry needs to better serve these audiences. I mean, but of course, this is all very recent. I mean, Oscars So White and all of these things, we're still not solved. We haven't resolved these issues completely, but there has been progress. I mean, there's just more shows, there's more advertising. I'm sure you've noticed that there's more ads with, that have more like sort of diverse people in them, whether it's not just Black or Hispanic, but also people with disabilities, LGBTQ, and things like that. So the media industry has certainly evolved, and I applaud them for the work that they have done to date. But what we started hearing from consumers, because we do a lot of focus groups, we do, as you mentioned in my bio, we do a lot of work talking to people every day about how they feel about representation in the media, how they feel about representation in advertising. We do a lot of tests where we actually show people ads and ask them what they think. And one of the themes that kept coming up over and over again in our research is, well, it's great that they, put diverse people in this ad, but none of those people really look like me. Right. Look at me. I have much darker skin. I have very different features. This person that I'm looking at in this ad that is supposed to be a Black person is like sort of almost like race neutral. Is this a Black person? Is this a South Asian person? Is it a Hispanic person? Is it somebody that's biracial? I'm not really sure, but I know it doesn't look like me. And, we started hearing more and more about that. And we realized that, there's still a lot more work that we need to do to help our clients do a better job of serving their audiences and their customers, that they, and show our communities that we're valued. And so that's how we got into this whole issue of really pointing out issues of colorism. And to me, it's really critical because of where we are in the world too. The media plays a really important role in creating narratives, perpetuating stereotypes, and even, of course, can play a role in busting stereotypes and creating new and more healthy and progressive narratives. And so, it's not just about serving communities or selling more stuff. It's also about changing minds and helping move our country along on this struggle that we're in for equality.
Yes, absolutely. So, okay, so you really answered the question about what made you want to address it. I'm going to pull up the slides. You've got some amazing slides here for us. So, if you could go ahead and talk about your information that you have here.
Absolutely. So, so we do a bunch of research every year, and this is actually just, as you can see, it says July 2020. So we just got out of the field with this research, and it's just a few little tidbits of data, but it's just to really underscore that, Karen, you're an activist. We are in the business of educating and advocating for communities, but, our are people out there really thinking and feeling, what we see and think and believe.
Right.
And our data certainly do suggest that consumers, because we are all consumers, like it or not, we're in a capitalist, consumer-driven society. We are all consumers. Are becoming more and more, sort of aware of the role of the media, and also demanding of more representation, especially in advertising. So let's take a look. So, thinking about the role of media, right? We asked this question: how much do you agree with the following statement? That the media plays a very big role in what people know and feel about multicultural communities in the U.S. So, what you're seeing on TV, what you're seeing in ads, what those narratives are, shape the way people think. And in fact, pretty much everybody agrees. 59% of everybody we surveyed, 60% of Black consumers we surveyed, and 58% of Hispanics. So those are all statistically the same number. So basically, 6 out of 10 people really do agree that the media plays an incredibly important role, and we all know that, and that's why it's so important to to support media that is on positives and really helping dispel negative ones. And then the other thing that we thought was really important and incredibly interesting is that when we think about how conversations around race and colorism and all of these things and discrimination have evolved, there's been a real shift in the past 6 months, I would call it, right? Mm-hmm. With everything that's been going on with BLM and all of that. And the shift being this, that, people in academic circles, people in activist circles, all of us have known for a lot of years about institutionalized racism and structural inequality and all of that stuff. These are terms that we're all used to. Right. But these are not terms that were in popular discourse. These were not terms that like an everyday consumer walking down the street or person walking down the street ever heard. And now all of a sudden, with the optics of BLM and, the focus on the institution of policing and how discrimination is so built into those systems and processes and and procedures and policies, that conversation now has become a conversation that's entered popular discourse, and our data are now starting to show that people are really understanding this. And so we ask the question: do you believe that it is important for the media to shed light on the social, political, and/or economic barriers that people of color face that are beyond their control? Because see, that's the key, beyond their control, because all of the narratives around race and difference and discrimination, I'm sure have always been sort of driven by the personal, the interpersonal. I don't like these people, or I believe that these people are whatever, right. Not as smart, or not as intellectual, or not as hardworking, or whatever the narrative, the mythology that people might have believed. Right. But it's always been about an interpersonal, that person, that group, that community, and never really an awareness that there are barriers that are built into the structures of our society that put people at a disadvantage. But now, 39% of folks that we surveyed just recently agree that it's important for the media to shed light on those barriers. In other words, they're acknowledging that the barriers exist beyond our control, and also saying that, hey, it's important for the media to really pinpoint that exists, that structural inequality exists. And of course, Black and Latinx community, the Latinx community, especially the Black community, are even more aware that the media really needs to help shift those narratives and really educate people about structural inequality. So I think that is fantastic. It's a fantastic outcome of what's happening. I mean, obviously, what's happening today is unprecedented. Maybe not unprecedented. We've seen. We've seen these movements. Unfortunately, we're still having the same conversations for all of these decades. But to me, this particular sense of this shift in that, we want to break down these barriers. We want structural inequality to end, and we think the media, whether it's in the way that they report the news, whether it's in the way that they tell stories in entertainment shows, should play a role in that. Which, by the way, I think shows like Blackish do an amazing job with that. I mean, I have loved how Blackish for so long has, really taken it upon themselves to bring up and educate about all of these themes, including colorism. As you know, they've addressed that.
Their colorism episode was amazing.
Amazing. I just brilliant. But, one show.
Right.
Anyway, so there's that. And then the next piece, which I think is also important, is that we have Black media, right? We have Black television, we have Black radio, we have Black, print, websites and digital and print and all that kind of stuff. And also we have, a lot of Hispanic media. And not surprisingly, consumers who are Black, consumers who are Hispanic, believe, first of all, that our media, our Latino media or our Black media, play a really important role in helping educate our communities. I wrote here Hispanic community, the Black or Hispanic community, in ways that the mainstream media does not, because the mainstream media has not taken that role. Right? It's the advocacy happens in our media, but not anywhere else, and that's because that's the role of that media. Right? Its targeted nature, means that these are the audiences that they serve. Black and Hispanic folks also tell us that they believe that our media represents our cultures, our lifestyles, etc., better than mainstream media does. So they really feel like they are left out, even with all of the improvements that mainstream media has done to date. Still feel somewhat left out of mainstream conversations, and really look to multicultural media, Black, Hispanic, Asian, LGBT, whatever it is, media, to represent them. And that's problematic because we are not, Black and Hispanic consumers and other diverse consumers are American consumers. We are the quote unquote general market of the United States. We are headed to a multicultural majority very soon. Among younger generations, we are already there. So any media brand, any advertiser, any company that wants to serve Americans need to do a better job of representing all Americans in their stories, in their news, in their imagery, and all of that kind of stuff. And the fact, I love our media. I love that there's Black targeted media. I love that I think it's super important, and I never want to see all of that go away, because those media outlets play an incredibly important role in our communities. But that doesn't excuse mainstream media from being more inclusive and advertising. Finally, the last slide that I brought is about part of the conversation that I know we're going to get to in a minute, which is about advertising, right? And brands, because now more than ever, people are. I mean, social media. It used to be back in the day that a brand, an advertiser, could sort of hide behind their literal ivory tower, their corporate, sort of anonymity. And it didn't matter what their politics were, or their thoughts were, or, any of that kind of stuff. It was just all about, the product that they created and getting people to buy their products. But in the age of social media, in the age of people becoming more and more woke, in the age of much more transparency about, what CEOs are doing and what, campaigns companies are contributing to, and all that kind of stuff, with all that information that's out there, it becomes much more relevant and important for brands to start paying attention to the optics of what they say, how they say it, who they support, and all of that kind of stuff. And a big part of that is advertising, right? So first of all, 41% of people overall agreed that they would go out of their way to buy products from brands because they noticed that they made an effort to be more inclusive, of Black, Hispanic, and other people, diverse people, or the people of color in their ads. And of course, our communities, 53% of Black and 52% of Latino communities, folks in our survey, believed that. So even more so than the average, which includes, of course, white non-Hispanics as well. So people are starting to pay attention to the messaging that's in advertising, how they feel, whether or not they feel represented, whether they see themselves and their cultures and stories that connect with them represented in advertising, and are making conscious choices about the brands that they support or don't support because of it. And of course, we've seen the mistakes that some brands have made that have led to outcry, right? For good reason. So those optics are incredibly important, becoming more and more important. And similarly, 43% of consumers overall told us that they specifically buy products from brands because they have come out in support of racial and political issues that they believe in. And of course, that is also higher among Black and Hispanic consumers, who almost half of whom say that they would go out of their way to support a brand that they think is making a positive statement in this world. Which is why the whole Goya thing was so interesting. I actually was quoted about the Goya situation a few weeks ago,
Right.
Because of exactly those kind of optics. So I just thought that, those couple of data points. Of course, we have a lot more data around that, these issues, but really just point to the fact that we're beyond the time when brands can ignore the importance and power of Black audiences, Hispanic audiences, other diverse audiences. It's just not good for the bottom line for them, and socially, it's not good for our society. So on those, with those two notions in mind, I think that we're going to be seeing a lot of change moving forward. And as much as I might sound like I'm critiquing the media industry, I will say that there has been a lot of positive change, and including things very recently. So for example, like in the media industry, media and advertising sort of all related, right? There are a number of organizations already that exist, and I thought maybe your listeners might be interested in, or your audience, in knowing about some organizations, because look, change only can happen from within, right? And we need more people of color, Black, Hispanic, or diverse people, LGBTQ, people with disabilities, Asian folks, like whatever. We need more people in positions of power and in creative positions to help sort of, work on whatever the creative execution is, the storylines, the graphics, all this kind of stuff, to be able to really make this happen. And there are some organizations that have been around for a while. These are not new, that are focused on improving diversity in the media and advertising industries.
Right.
And they are always looking to mentor young people, to help young people get actual jobs and things like that. So I thought I'd mention some of these organizations in case anybody that's watching has an interest in getting into the media and advertising space. But I would encourage them to look up. There are 4 organizations I wanted to mention, actually 5. One is NAMIC, which is the National Association of Multi-Ethnicity in Communications. And that is an organization that actually creates sort of leadership programs and mentoring opportunities for young people of color who come into particularly the media and telecommunications space. And they have some great programs, and in fact, they're going to have a conference in September, which they always have their conference. It's called Diversity Week, and so NAMIC is one. Another one is the T. Howard Foundation. They have a mentoring program where young people who are in college or about to graduate college, young people of color can get matched up with companies in the media industry, advertising and content and distribution space for internship opportunities, which then can also lead to job placements. So the T. Howard Foundation, that's another one. Another organization that does similar pretty much similar things is called the Emma Bowen Foundation. We can make all these links available to your audience later. And then finally, the Walter Cates Foundation. Those are 4 organizations that do great work around diversity in the media and advertising space. And then the last, I said finally, but actually there's one more. The last one I want to mention is actually an organization that has not necessarily been focused on diversity. Those other 4 have been. That's their whole purpose of being, is to encourage diversity. This one is called the Advertising Research Foundation, ARF, the Advertising Research Foundation. Now, this one is very important because this is an organization that whose membership is basically all the media companies and all the ad agencies, big ad agencies and media buying organizations. And what their job is at the Advertising Research Foundation is to help advertisers and advertising agencies do a better job at what they do, which is sell more stuff,
Right.
And create better creative and whatever more effective advertising to be able to do that. And the ARF has actually just launched a wonderful program called WIDE, WIDE, which is a scholarship program, and it involves various aspects, but mostly it's a scholarship program, which is designed to help underprivileged people as well as people of color in general. So underprivileged across the board, but people, not everybody is underprivileged, but really trying to help make sure that issues of finishing your education and getting a degree and all this kind of stuff doesn't prevent you from getting into getting work in the media, in the advertising world. And so it's called the Workplace Initiative for Diversity and Excellence. That's what WIDE stands for. This is a brand new program. They actually just launched this really in the face of everything that's been going on this year. Right. So brand new initiative. So while I do believe that the media industry and the advertising industry has a way to go, a long ways to go, there are definitely organizations and resources, and the more people from our communities that come into the industry, the more rapidly we will see change, change for the better. And we haven't even started talking about colorism, but
that was amazing. That was amazing information that we can certainly use. So let me ask you: is the concept of colorism versus racism something your clients are aware of before you come to them? Do you find that they are somewhat aware or not aware at all? Or
well, it really depends on how many people from our communities they have working for them, to be honest with you, because this is not something that baby steps. Okay. So, so we've gotten to the point where there's an acknowledgement and an understanding that advertising needs to be more diverse. And there is definitely an effort towards not just representation, not just diversity in terms of more people of color, Black, Hispanic, whatever people in the ads, but also that the ads need to be culturally connect, right? It's not just about tokenism. It's not just about taking an ad and throwing a Black person in it and that's it, right? It's also about connecting and resonating with the right messages and the right stories. So on that note, there has been some, positive change. We've seen positive change. We've seen more ads and more creative. That's really excellent. And Nike does an amazing job, but they're like up here. They do such amazing work overall. But there are other brands that also do fantastic work. What's interesting about those, even the great work that they do, is that it's not always necessarily put in mainstream media, which it goes back to the whole issue of, yes, it's important that we have our media, but why so often are great creative created, but then it never really gets into the mainstream. And the reason that has happened all along is because, up until sort of really recently, there's always been sort of a nervousness about, well, if we do too many ads with too many people of color, with too much sort of cultural nuances that white non-Hispanics wouldn't connect with, or that other people wouldn't get, because if the ad has a lot of like Black cultural references and whatever, then maybe the Asian people won't understand it, or maybe the Hispanic people won't understand. So advertising in general has sort of always gotten used to just delivering the lowest common denominator, but that always ended up being, something that everybody would understand.
Right.
But the default was always white. And we have to question why that is. Like, why is it that we assume that white is the norm and everything else is not the norm, right? That's been kind of the way that it had operated for a long time. But now like I said, there's been some movement. We've seen more advertising that's more diverse, even on our mainstream media and stuff like that. Not only that, but there's been some real efforts to do a better job. So for example, the ANA, which is the Association of National Advertisers. So these are all the big companies, all the big CPG companies, all the big retailers. Everybody are members of this organization. All the big media companies, all the advertising agencies. And the ANA just recently came out with a metric that they are using it's called the CIIM, and it stands for Cultural Insights Impact Measurement. And it's a whole sort of way that they can test to see whether an ad's creative might resonate or might be offensive to different people. And then that's sort of like a test that they're doing to try to help the brands that have been a little nervous to get into this space of being more inclusive in their advertising to feel a little more confident, because what people don't want to do is make a mistake, make a cultural misstep, and then end up like Dove with that mistake, with that ad, or H&M, or any of those brands that have messed up. So they don't want to do that. So that's been something that they've been afraid of, right? And so the ANA has come out with this metric. We actually at our company also have our own metric we're developing, which is a little bit more robust than what they have. Theirs is like meant to just do a quick check of creative, but ours is it's called Culture Check, and it's more robust. It looks at representation. It looks at the relevancy of the message. It looks at the creative execution, which could be things like, what does the set look like? What is the music in the background? All those kinds of things. Like, we really take a much more detailed look, but ours is more to help, agencies actually develop the creative. So that's kind of, but these agencies need help, because brands are afraid to, make a mistake and then have backlash, right? So that's why that's important. But getting into the colorism. So there's all this positive change, but colorism is like this implicit bias thing that, unless you bring it up, people don't understand. People don't even know they're doing it. And in many ways, and this is one of the things that I wrote in that article that you found, is it's actually almost like an efficiency thing, like, well, if we're going to do an ad that is multicultural, quote unquote, then let's find somebody that's a light-skinned Black person, because maybe somebody who's Hispanic will see that ad and think that person is Hispanic, or so on and so forth. And so it's like, rather than having to figure out how to make an ad resonate, or make different ads to resonate with different groups of people and whatever, it's almost like, quote unquote, easier to find a person that is more sort of kind of ethnic, but like not really, not too ethnic. So that's one of the reasons, but really the other reason is what you and I both know, which is that our society is steeped in colorism everywhere we look, and there's a reason for that, and we really do need to confront colorism as a society, as part of our effort to dismantle racism, and all of it comes back to the social construction around race, the social construction of race,
right?
And that's where what I find, really fascinating is, and I'm not an anthropologist, but my sister is. So yes, my sister, Elise Waterston, she's actually a pretty well-known anthropologist, and she was, she's the immediate past president of the American Anthropological Association, which is the largest association of anthropologists in the world. Very influential organization, and she's brilliant. But and that's how I know all these other anthropologists that I was telling you about. But if you spoke to an anthropologist, they would do a much better job than me in explaining that we have all bought the Kool-Aid that race exists, or that blackness is black is a race, white is a race. Hispanic is a whole other thing, because that's whatever. Anyway, we don't have to get into that. But the reality is that we really need to we should think about checking our language if we want to really create real change, because a better way to think about it is racialized difference. Biologically, if you looked at our DNA, and all of us are now doing all our DNA tests and everything like that. Yeah. The reality is, and this Jonathan Marks, who's that biological anthropologist I was telling you about earlier, can explain this much better than me. But as human beings, we share 94% of our DNA. So this idea that there's groups of people that, because their physical characteristics are different, that they are inherently different, that's not really true biologically. Socially, culturally, yes, because and this goes back to the history of slavery and the 18th century, and where it became very important for in order to maintain the status quo of power, colonial power, and all of that, to make sure that there were a set of laws and systems and policies and all this institutional stuff that we've talked about that put people in one category and put people in another, and assign power and privilege to one category and to deny power and privilege to another. Right. And color was the way they did that, by saying people that have this color are going to fit into this one category, and it's of course problematic, because color is a spectrum anyway, right? But that's where the notion of race really started taking hold. And so I think that it's important to, obviously we have cultural differences, cultural nuances. There's beauty in all of our heritages and our cultures. There's certainly no denying that. I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but that the superiority or inferiority and other characteristics that were assigned to groups of people based on skin color are false. They're just false. And but they have been very. This is a worldview that took hold, in the New World, and it has spread across the world. Yes. And because it's a very effective tool, and it's been a very effective tool at maintaining the power status quo for of the privileged whiteness, and and of course discriminated against blackness. And so as we talked about in our original conversation, there's the interracial colorism, and then there's the intraracial colorism. Right. But regardless of whether you're talking about interracial or intraracial, the fact of the matter is that you can hardly blame all of us for we've been sold this bill of goods, right? We've been told that the lighter you are, the more privilege you will have. And so we have internalized that. And so in the Latino culture, as well as I know, in the Black community, even if it's implicit, even if it's not something that we necessarily recognize, those sort of preferences have been subtly built in and baked into the way that we think, because that's the way that it's been experienced. That if you're light enough to pass, you're going to have a different experience of the world. And that's just, it's just a really obviously incredibly problematic thing. And that's why, going back to the slides that we talked about earlier about how people today really believe that the media and advertisers and all of those folks, the onus is on them to change narratives. Shifting narratives around color in ads and in content is going to go a long way in helping shift these perceptions of privilege that is conferred on whiteness. And so,
do you think that a lot of these advertising companies and agencies, do they not have enough people of color in the agencies to help bring these points out? Or do you think that maybe the people that are in there don't feel comfortable about making these points? What do you think about that?
One of the, well, I think all of the above, right? I mean, I think every agency it operates differently, and I think that different corporate cultures allow for people to feel like their voices are heard better than others. There's also wonderful, amazing agencies that are Black-owned agencies or that are Hispanic-owned agencies that do phenomenal work. One of the issues, and this is not new in the industry, is that, again, it's all about budget efficiencies, right? So back in the day, and these budgets have gotten bigger and bigger over time, but, Black and Hispanic agencies and networks or media would get tiny budget that mainstream, quote unquote, advertising and networks would get, right? So, even though whatever, Hispanics are, I forget the number now, it's 18% of the population, what is it now? Blacks are 18% of the population. We wouldn't see 18% of the population going to Black media or to Black agencies. Right. So that, that's problematic, right?
Yes.
And then, but the Black agencies and the Hispanic agencies do amazing work and do understand, how to really join these issues that we're talking about of colorism and culture and stuff like that, much better than, an agency that's a quote unquote general agency would be able to do.
Right.
So that's a big part of it. And I think that, I hope that one of the outcomes of what's happening now in the world, and as more and more businesses and companies start to wake up to the fact that they need to do a better job of understanding issues around race and diversity and color and discrimination, and do a better job of resonating with our communities, that that's going to translate to more money being given to agencies that really know how to do a good job of connecting with our communities, whether it's through how people are represented in ads, to how the stories are told. I think we're in a moment of change, and I'm actually quite hopeful that that things are going to get a lot better over time.
Right. So, Horowitz studies Black consumer engagement and helps companies to go beyond advertising. Mm-hmm. How today's socio-political climate is changing how consumers think about how they patronize brands and what that means for brand positioning. So recently, on July 9th, 2020, there was a blackout day for purchasing by the Black community. There were other suggested boycotts of brands that support the current administration. So how would you communicate at this point to advertisers about their approach to Black consumers during the current socio-political climate?
I mean, I'd actually, like to answer that talking about us as consumers, if that's okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Because, as we said at the top of this interview, the United States is a capitalist country. We are all consumers. We are people, and we are communities, and we are all that stuff. But we are really, what we are just people with a credit card that goes to a checkout line or puts a thing in a online shopping cart, and we communicate with our dollar. That is the best form of, and I actually think that, yes, there's the blackout day, and there's the Goya boycott that I mentioned, and there's been other boycotts and stuff like that, and I think all of that is all very important, but you need to follow through, because social media, everybody gets all up in arms in social media, and I think and of course brands are like, oh my God, we made a mistake, we got to do better, and all of that is good, but it's almost a little bit like the boy who cried wolf if we don't really follow through, right? So if there's change that we want to have happen, it's not enough to just be upset about it in social media and say you're going to boycott X brand or Y brand, but then secretly go stand in line in Walmart or Target and buy that brand, and just hope that nobody else sees you. That's not going to work, because in the end, it's going to actually disempower us and disempower our voices, because if we continue to threaten, we're going to boycott, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, but we don't actually make the companies feel it in their bottom line, then the next couple of times we say that we're going to do it, they're going to just be like, yeah, whatever, we don't believe you. So I think it's super important for us to put our money where our mouths are, and not just not just support things sort of in theory, but actually really support these movements and these efforts, with our wallets.
Right. So
whatever that issue is.
Make them more aware too about how we feel about not seeing enough darker skinned people in the advertising, how do we as a community go about making it known that, we're not seeing enough darker skinned people in your advertisements?
And that's such a great question, because it's like the absence of. So how do you, how do you point that out? It's like, it's difficult, right? It's like if they do something wrong, then it's easy to say you just screwed up. But if it's just the absence of, so I think really a better way to do it is the opposite. Is when you do see a great ad with that, by a brand that maybe has not necessarily shown up for the Black community, or that hasn't necessarily been a big presence in the Hispanic community, or whatever your community is that is your community of interest.
Right.
Let them know, celebrate what they did, point it out. That's where you can start using social media, Twitter, whatever. Share the ad. They track all these things, like all the, how frequently ads have been shared and viewed, and and people comment and stuff like that. So I think positive reinforcement, because even though it's not necessarily, you're not, and also, yeah, take it to the checkout counter,
Right.
and tell them that you've done so. So if it's like McDonald's comes out with a great ad, which they do, McDonald's is another one that they do great advertising in our communities. I'm not necessarily encouraging people to go out and
right.
eat McDonald's. I mean, I shouldn't say one way or the other. I'm just saying that's probably a bad example. But whatever, you know what I mean? Like, tell them, like, I saw this ad. It's great. They've done a great job. I love how they're representing us. I feel myself. I see my story here. I love that they, went bold and selected an actor who has darker skin, or, when they do things like that and then they get positive reinforcement, I think that's when they'll start paying attention.
Right. And we do see the ads. It's interesting because I think we do see the ads more so on what's called Black TV, BT, or some other, we'll see the luxury car with the Black folks, but we won't see it, like you said, we won't see it in mainstream. It's reserved for our particular stations, what they think that most Black people are watching. Right.
So that would be another thing. I mean, obviously, this is a lot of work. So I don't know that everybody would actually do this, but, we all watch all the, mainstream, whatever, broadcast networks. We all watch all the cable networks. I don't know how, whatever, everybody watches different things, but generally speaking, there's people of color that are watching all the mainstream stuff. So if you actually happen to notice that, oh wow, I just saw whatever. I'm not going to name names but like this car brand advertising on BET, and they had a Black person in the ad, and then I just turned on ABC or NBC, and I see the same similar ad for the same car, and it's white people. Point that out. I think that would be something that, if they start noticing that people are noticing that, that might help, move along change. Social media is really powerful for that. But as I said, with the social media stuff, with boycotting, you have to be careful, because if you're not actually doing it, don't say you're going to do it.
Right. And we really do have to follow through. And I think that's where sometimes we miss the boat. We don't follow through. We start off gung ho, and we really don't follow through with making sure. I think you and I talked about the fact that even when, the Montgomery bus boycott was going on, Black people stayed off the bus for over a year in order to get the buses integrated. So I think that we've got to be willing to really do the follow through, which in many instances will require some sacrifice. And many times, it's an issue of whether or not we're willing to make the sacrifice, or that we're even in a position to make the sacrifice.
Right.
To do what's necessary to begin to see the change. We have to be willing to really sacrifice.
Right. And think about what a sacrifice that was.
Yes.
Versus, really not such a big sacrifice if you decide not to buy. I'm going to name a brand, not that there's any reason not to buy this brand, but like, Palmolive. Like if they do something bad, just pick a different brand of, of dishwashing soap. It's not going to really be that much of a hardship. Again, Palmolive, I'm not critiquing them. It's just what I looked at the counter, and that's what I saw. Also wanted to correct myself, because I always get confused with census numbers. But so I was.
Wow. That was pretty amazing. That was really amazing. She brought up so many points, and we do not have enough time to talk about all of the points that she brought up in that broadcast. It was really amazing, and the information that she gave us and things to think about. And one of the things that resonated with me, and I say it all the time, when she said we communicate with our dollars. And that is something that communities of color really have to really begin to understand, is that we communicate with our dollars. And if you continue to spend money with people who do not value you, they will continue to not value you. And it is, I know that the buying power of the African American community alone, I believe, is something like $2 trillion or $4 trillion. And so we continue many times to put our money in places that are not valuing us. And until we really get a true understanding of what that's doing and what that means and the follow through, we're going to continue to see things happen. Can't hear you. All right, there you go.
Okay, sorry about that. And so much of our money leaves our community.
Yes.
I think that we only really keep in our community only 10 cents for every dollar that we make.
Right.
So, we have a lot of buying power that we're giving away to other people who, like you say, don't respect us.
Right.
And who don't value us. And you do have to follow through. That's one of the things that is so important, to make sure that, a lot of companies are responding right now to all the racial issues that have been going on. And they're doing this and they're doing that, and they're really trying to be inclusive. But we need to stay on them and make sure that they stay inclusive.
Right.
that this is just not a response so that they don't lose money, but to hold them accountable, 6 months, a year down the line, that they're not just doing this to get our trust and our dollars back, but to know that if you don't continue this, you won't have our trust and you won't have our dollars.
Right. And even, when the whole thing was about, when it came around to the political climate and the companies that were supporting the current administration, and the idea that, like Adriana was saying, the idea that we should boycott, but the boycotts didn't take place. In a lot of places, those boycotts didn't take place. And when people are funding a campaign that blatantly does not acknowledge certain things that are happening in the country, to continue to support and put money in the pockets of these people, who then put money in the pockets of the people who are not interested in denouncing certain ideologies, we're not even thinking along the terms of what that really means.
True. And a lot of it's very interesting, because one of the very first things that Adriana said was that she never really even recognized the privilege she had.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you don't recognize that you have privilege, you can't recognize the institutional racism, because you don't see it from somebody else's perspective. So it's really important to make sure that people understand it, and that they see, there's some people are just going to be racist just because they are, and one thing that has really kind of, I guess, disturbed me with this whole political thing is that everybody's about themselves and about their pocket.
Yeah.
What makes me rich? What keeps me rich?
Oh, yeah.
You're not thinking about the other person. And so you really have to kind of get people to understand that, you may not be thinking about me, but ultimately, if I'm not financially stable, then I'm not spending money. And if I'm not spending money, you're not making money. And so you have to not only care about me as a human being, but then you have to look at this whole privilege thing that's been going on. And it's very difficult for people to understand, because if you've grown up white in this country, it is possible for you to exist without ever having met a Black person or ever having had to interact with a Black person. But most Black people don't have that opportunity. We have to interact in your world. So we have to understand what goes on with you. But you don't ever have to understand what goes on with me.
Right.
And that's something that we really need to try and work on. And like she was saying, get media out there that shows people, this is us. This is our culture. This is our history. And you need to understand it and respect it.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things here, I just looked this up in this particular article. Now, I'm just saying this article, in truth be told, whether or not I'm just telling you what this article is saying. But it says the lifespan of $1 in the Asian community is 28 days. In the Jewish community, the lifespan of $1 is 19 days. And the lifespan in the African community is approximately 6 hours.
6 hours.
6 hours.
And we have
to be more conscious, I feel, about supporting Black businesses, which we're getting away from colorism some here, but about supporting Black businesses. Even when you're talking about advertising and you're talking about colorism and all of that, but still we have to begin to support Black businesses.
But to a certain extent, that is almost
our money in our communities, because, even when you're in our communities, finding a Black-owned store in a Black community. Now, here in Philadelphia, unless you are in maybe West Philly, I'm not too sure about even North Philly, but finding a Black-owned establishment in our own communities, even, you can be hard-pressed to find one.
But a lot of that, too, I think it's colorism to a certain extent, because I can't tell you the number of people, and it just does something to me every time I hear it. Automatically assume because you're Black, you don't know how to do business.
Right.
So you've made a determination about but you will have no problem walking up into a white establishment or an Asian establishment, assuming they know how to handle their business.
And they won't even speak English sometimes around you.
Or they have their own already built-in racism or built-in ideas about you, because what they've learned about you is what they see on TV.
But they know they can come in our communities and we'll buy.
Because let me tell you, I will never forget that as long as I live, I was sent to Korea by the military, and within the first week I was there, I saw black dolls, and I mean black dolls, with big red lips holding a piece of watermelon.
Mm.
That was their impression of the Black community in the United States because of what they had been exposed to. So this is why media is so important, because media is portraying what they want to of how we are and who we are.
You know, I even shared with, I was even sharing with Dr. Rivers yesterday that one of the TV shows that I really like, For Life, about the black man that was wrongfully convicted of being a drug kingpin. Mm. But even as I watch the show, and because I advocate in the colorism space and I work in the colorism space, I did notice though how the majority of the black men in the scenes in the prison were dark-skinned black men.
But that made me truly.
Black man in there was the one that came to save his family. He was the guy that was there to, take over and save his family and all of this while he was dating the white. It's a whole long story if you have to watch the show. But the bottom line is, though, that I noticed that the men that were in prison, primarily, they are primarily dark-skinned men in prison, and they are, they're characterized as being hard, and they're thugs, and they're murderers, and they're this and they're that. And it was amazing to me as I'm watching this show. It was just amazing to me to actually see that and realize it.
Well, part of that may be slightly true reflectively, because dark-skinned men do tend to be imprisoned far more than light-skinned men. They get longer sentences. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's correct. It doesn't mean that they are thugs and hardened criminals and, the people that they're portrayed to be. Mm-hmm. But statistically, as part of institutional racism, darker-skinned men are in prison more often and receive longer terms.
Right, but my thing begins to be, what message is that sending, though?
That's true.
What message does that send to see this show with these hardened criminals, and they're all dark-skinned black men, right, primarily? They're dark.
I've been fortunate enough to know people from a lot of different cultures, and quite a few of them who came here and didn't speak English. They learned to speak English from watching TV. But not only are they learning to speak English from watching TV, they're picking up cultural cues.
Right.
And so they're picking up the cues that, dark-skinned men are in prison and criminals. And, white men are, doctors and lawyers and more acceptable criminals. Because it's amazing to me how we almost idolize certain criminals. Bonnie and Clyde, the movies are made about them, and right, they're almost put on a pedestal.
Right.
Al Capone and all that. They make great movies about these people.
Right.
But they don't make great movies about all the positive things that Black people have done.
Right. So one of the things I think that we have to take away from this rebroadcast and from this conversation is that one thing we communicate with our dollars, and that how important it is to, when we see commercials, when we see media that highlights us positively, to make a point about acknowledging it. Mm. So that when you see the dark-skinned woman with the natural hair or the dark-skinned man, that's doing, that's dark-skinned man in a suit that is going about his business, doing his work, or a woman, a dark-skinned female who was going about business, doing her work. That, you know, we acknowledge those ads, and we let the advertisers know that we want to see more of that, and we want to see more of that in the mainstream. That it's just not for BET. It's not just for TV1. It's not just for the Black networks, but we are mainstream America. Like Adriana said, we are part of America. So we are part of mainstream America. And it becomes now an issue of being represented within mainstream America.
And I think the other final thing to take away from that is that when you show me the ads on what you think I'm watching, you're limiting my access to information.
Yes.
You're choosing who I shop with. You're trying to choose who I support. And even when she was talking about the redlining, where they didn't want to put cable in certain communities,
Right.
that restricts our access to information. That restricts our access to education. That restricts our access to skills.
Yes, it does. It
And
does.
so when you, now I've got this already restricted information network, and then you want to restrict it even more because you want to say that, you know, this ad will work fine in this setting.
Right, right, right. Well, this was really great. This was really great. There was a great show that we did with Adriana. This has been a great discussion with you, sis.
Thank you.
And I encourage you, those of you who watched, or if you watched the replay, to invite other people to watch and to get an understanding of advertising in our communities, and an understanding of what it is for there to be issues of colorism in advertising. So I want to wish you guys a wonderful rest of your Sunday. Christmas time is coming up. Black Friday is coming up. You can go to the Color of Beautiful website. We have T-shirts. Sissy's got got her T-shirt on. And we have sweatshirts. Okay, and we have journals and mugs. So please go to the color spelled COLOUR, because you are beautiful. thecolorofbeautiful.com. Get your T-shirts. Get your sweatshirts. Give the gift of affirmation. I am the color of beautiful. Let your sisters, and do it for yourself and for your sisters and your daughters and your nieces, and let them know that they are the color of beautiful. We also have the self-care collection that is coming out for Good Friday. And if you want to be notified of when that sale goes live on Friday, you can get a free I Am the Color of Beautiful affirmations journal if you go to affirmationsjournal.thecolorofbeautiful.com. Thank you guys so much, and have an amazing, amazing, amazing rest of your day. Be blessed.